All right, a little quiz here to start off this week's lecture. What do the following have in common? The Amateur Softball Association, the Retinitis Pigmentosa Foundation, Candy Wholesalers Association, the Barbecue Industry Association, the Chocolate Manufacturers Association, and the Sporting Goods Association. I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. Think about what they might have in common. If we were in class, we'd ask for a little discussion. But we are not, so just think about that. What do they have in common? And the answer is these are all organizations that seek to have a national daylight savings program. This is the National Daylight Savings Coalition. In other words, if you go back to these associations, they're all interest groups, and one of the things that they have in common is that they all want this national daylight savings. So what is an interest group? We're obviously going to be looking at interest groups. An interest group is an organization or body of individuals who share some political goal and seek to influence public policy to the attainment of that political goal. So going back to this first slide, all these organizations, even though they are different, they all want that national daylight savings times. Why would they want it? Well, the Amateur Softball Association wants it because that's when people play softball. They play it in the evening when it's light. A lot of places don't have lights on their fields. The Retinitis Pigmentosa Foundation, light is good for the eye, so they want it. The Candy Wholesalers, the Barbecue Industry, the Chocolate Manufacturers, they all want it because when we're outside, we're at these baseball games or picnics, whatever, we buy more of their products and they make more money. And the Sporting Goods Manufacturers Association, of course, you need sporting goods equipment to play the softball. So they all have this in common, and so they all come together to form that coalition, but for the National Daylight Savings. But these are all associations, and most associations are an interest group of one form or another. So again, an interest group is an organization, an organized body of individuals who share some political goal and seek to influence public policy to the attainment of that goal. So the question becomes, are interest groups just or unjust? Are they good or evil, as your book puts it? Why should some group be able to band together and change public policy to the benefit of their members? That's kind of an unjust view or an evil view. On the other hand, why shouldn't some group be able to band together where there is something that is important to them and seek to influence public policy? If it's that important for us that we will band together with a group, then maybe we ought to be able to do that. That's the view that interest groups are just or good. So let's give you an example of this, and this may be in a more egregious example. I'm showing the unjust or evil side, but nevertheless, here it is. There is an interest group known as the CCPOA, that stands for the California Correctional Peace Officers Association. These are not necessarily police officers, but they are prison guards in the prisons throughout the state of California. One of the things that makes an interest group strong is the number of members it has. The more members it has, the more money it's able to raise, and the more it's able to do for those members. So ask yourself the question, what is the largest interest group in the state of California? Which group has more members than any other? Think about that for a second. The largest interest group in California is the CTA. That stands for the California Teachers Association. There's some 325,000 members of the CTA. So if you wonder why half of the California state budget goes to education, is because this is one of the most powerful interest groups in the state, because there's not only 325,000 members, but each one of those members pays roughly $1,100 a year into that organization, giving the California Teachers Association a budget of $357,500,000 a year. That is a lot of money to form an organization to influence public policy that would be to the benefit of the members of that association. So the California Peace Officers Association had a great idea, at least they thought it was a great idea. we need more prison guards. If we have more prison guards, we'll have more dues and we'll be able to influence public policy more with that money. And so they had an idea. Let's pass a three strikes law, which says if you commit three felonies, on the third felony, you can go to jail for 25 years to life. This would require more prison guards because more people would be in prison, and you would need guards to guard them. So they go to the California legislature, and they get it put on the ballot. The voters vote for it, and California three strikes becomes law. One of the advantages to this approach was who would organize to fight against the policy. The perception was that it was good for society if we lock up these criminals. They're finally getting what they deserved. Who's going to fight on behalf of the criminals? So it was, in a sense, an easy sell. But you got about 10 years after it passed, people were looking at it and say, hey, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. They were locking up people for their third felony that weren't real serious felonies. What the law stated was the first two felonies had to be serious. The third felony didn't have to be serious. And so there was a movement to repeal the law, and there was actually a referendum, a ballot initiative to do just that. But still the people voted to keep it. So you can see here, if you go back to our question, are interest groups just or unjust, good or evil? From the perspective of some, this California three strikes law really just appears to be an attempt by an interest group to influence policy for the benefit of their members, and one of those benefits was higher pay, because now they had the means to pressure the legislature, to put pressure on the legislature, because their organization was larger. And at one particular point, they did get a raise over 3 years of 30%. So you can see why people think that interest groups tend to be unjust, bad, and that they serve only the interest of their members. Another view of that was it was just was because now you have these criminals who commit serious crime, that we don't have to just have the prisons be a revolving door. So the California Correctional Peace Officers Association argue that not only was the policy good for its members, but it was also good for society. And so you have this dichotomy with most interest groups as to whether they're good or evil, just or unjust. All right, so the positive view of interest groups then, if we can sum it up, allows individuals or groups who are most impacted to have the most influence on policy. The negative view is it allows individuals or groups to circumvent the public will or good and put their interest above the larger public interest. Let me give you one more example here with this. How about beauticians? Should you really need a license to cut somebody's hair? After all, what's the difference between a good haircut and a bad haircut? One guy put it this way. Now, granted, this was a guy. He said the difference between a good haircut and a bad haircut is 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, it grows out enough. It recovers from itself. So why should you need somebody to have a license to cut your hair? Well, the reason being is this association is organized and argues to their members that we can charge higher prices if there's fewer people cutting hair, and so they create this organization, which then pressures the legislature to pass legislation that says in order to cut hair in California, you've got to have a license to do it. And so it goes to that whole issue: what is good for society versus what is good for their members. Now, 2/3 of individuals polled in the United States regarded interest groups as a threat to democracy. You can kind of see that from the examples that I've given you. Yet, despite that, interest groups have enjoyed unparalleled growth in recent years. And so the conclusion your text draws is that we distrust interest groups in general, except those that speak on our behalf. That tends to be the approach, that we think interest groups are bad unless they speak on our behalf. So again, there's the definition of an interest group again. So how does an interest group do this? They do this through a lobbyist. So a lobbyist is someone who is sent to a to the legislature or to a representative to put pressure on them and request policies that are consistent with what the interest group's goals or purposes. Now, there's really not a whole lot of pressure that they can put on them anymore because of campaign finance reform laws. It used to be that interest groups could give much more money to candidates for elections, but we got interest groups out of this by limiting the amount of money an interest group could donate to a particular individual candidate. So what they mainly provide is information, but we'll come to that in a minute. So look at this slide right here, representation versus protection. So just because there's an association or an interest group that seeks to protect some group or policy does not mean that that group or policy actually gets protected. One of the best examples is the oil industry. It is represented by over 170 interest groups. That is important only if they get special protection. And you might think, given the high prices of gasoline, that they do get special protection. Such is not the case. Particularly, you can see this right now in 2020 with COVID, the COVID virus going on. Price of a barrel of gas, a barrel of oil, last checked was $23. Just a few weeks ago, is at $70 a barrel. So there are real forces that get brought to play on issues that, independent of what interest groups want, results in other issues. What is happening in the broader economy is just playing havoc with what interest groups would do to protect the price of oil. The real issue, particularly if you drive out of state, what you'll find is a gallon of gasoline in most other states of the nation is 50 cents or more cheaper than it is in California. That is because California legislatures have put that much tax on gasoline that doesn't exist in other states. All right, we'll end this part of the presentation right here and pick up with the next video.